Usually it goes live on Facebook first, so hi, Facebook friends. Also, since my camera is still on, I purposely wore my ugly Christmas sweater today, and it's just snowmen, so it's very like inclusive. I guess not for people that live in places that don't have snow. But
it's a holiday sweater.
Yes, exactly. My ugly holiday sweater, and it is from Goodwill. So okay, so I'm guessing we're probably live on most of our platforms now. So welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to our expert Q&A today. It is our last one for 2020. We almost made it, you guys. So today we are doing What is Religion in the Ancient World with Shane and Thompson and Michael Payne. Just really quick, what is SASA? SASA stands for Save Ancient Studies in America. Our mission is to reverse the current downward trend in the study of the ancient world by engaging the public and bringing together students and scholars to share their passion for the study of the ancient world in order to inspire a vast new generation of students. So key points there, we really want like younger people to get interested in ancient studies and take ancient studies classes at the university level, because that's what funds these departments and gets the information out there and gets new scholars in the field. These are just our social media links, so please follow us, subscribe to our pages, especially on Twitch. We're just a few followers away from 50 followers on Twitch, and that's our current goal right now, but obviously we want a lot more than that eventually. But we post on social media basically at least 5 days a week on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And then our live events are live streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. And you can find the recordings there as well. So follow our pages. Just some protocol for the live event today. Please be kind and respectful. Listen and ask thoughtful questions throughout the event. Please send in questions, you guys. This is why we're doing them, so you can ask the questions that you want to know. And these are our experts that are all right here, so they definitely have questions for each other, but we want to know what you're wondering about these topics. Please be patient with our technology and those administering it. SASA live events are streamed on Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube. SASA live events are recorded and archived and then posted on those platforms. And of course, have fun. And then thank you for coming. So I will hand things over to our lovely host, Shane.
Hi, thanks, Lauren. It's good to be here. I hope there are many of you watching, and I'll speak on behalf of Michael and myself. Please ask questions. As I said before we went live, this will be quite informal today. So today we are just wanted to broadly talk about religion in the ancient world, and both of those categories I think they mean something different, I think, to Michael and myself, including just what the ancient world is, because we both study quite different time periods, albeit somewhat in the same locale. So we'll be talking broadly about that and hope to get some questions from you all about that. Myself, I'm a PhD candidate at Brown. I'll be finishing hopefully this coming semester. My research is at times quite broad. I've published recently on straight, linguistic cuneiform tablets that are coming out, Sumerian tablets. I also publish on pedagogy, but my dissertation is on what I call cultural hegemony and counter hegemony, which is really non-active and non-violent modes, for lack of a better word, of imperialism and resistance to imperialism in the late Bronze and Iron Age Levant. So that means between 1500 BCE and 600 BCE in modern day Israel, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. My training is broad, though, in what most schools would say Hebrew Bible, but I look at both text and archaeology, but I also have a background in Assyriology, Egyptology, and Hittitology. So pretty broad. I did just want to mention that I have worked with SASA basically since its inception. And I obviously agree quite wholeheartedly with public outreach and things of this sort. As I said, I am very interested in pedagogy for a number of reasons, but both in the classroom and to broader public audiences. Outside of research, I do teach at several institutions on a quite a broad range of subjects, ranging from the ancient Near East to modern world religions, modern Judaism, and things of that sort. But I'll stop rambling for now, and we can get to some of those other things later and hand it off to my good buddy Michael, who is on the other side of the world and I haven't seen in months. It's good to see you, Michael.
Good to see you too, Shane. So my name is Michael Payne, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, Germany. I'm part of an ERC project on animals and philosophy of the Islamic world. I received my PhD from Brown University's Department of Religious Studies this year in September. And I'm broadly interested in early Islam and late antique Christianity, but my research primarily focuses on the social and intellectual history of 9th century Iraq. Currently, as a part of my postdoc, I'm writing about Al-Jahiz, who was a 9th century Arab intellectual, and kalam, which is a form of dialectical philosophy, and animals, which are animals. And I'm really happy to be here tonight because it is night right now in Bavaria, but I'm also very grateful for the invitation to partake in this event.
Cool. So what do you want to start talking about? Till we get some questions. I think maybe you start talking about, and then we can talk about this kind of in a two-pronged approach. Our backgrounds are both a little broad in the sense that we are both PhDs in a religious studies department, and both, as I said, broadly ancient world, but all of those things are kind of fluid concepts. So for the people out there who may be interested in this field or don't really, I always say when I went to undergrad, I thought this kind of stuff that we do would be in a history department, and it's not at most places. So if you're an undergrad out there and you're interested in this stuff, you might have to look a little harder. So myself, I have a master's in Near Eastern Studies, and then I'm now in a religious studies department. Michael, I know, has a similar background. But yeah,
no, so I started in Near Eastern languages and civilizations, and then Middle Eastern studies, and then religious studies, and now I'm in a philosophy department.
Right. And I also teach in a philosophy department and at a divinity school. So it's kind of all over the place. And then, at least for most of your time at Brown, we were technically in the same track, religion of the ancient Mediterranean, and don't do, in the academic world, we don't do anything related to each other time-wise and location-wise a bit, but not the same religions or anything of that sort. But we were still kind of thrown in the same ancient, which just means anything that's not modern, kind of.
That's stuff that's before the Middle Ages, right?
Before the Middle Ages, yeah. Yeah, so just a very fluid kind of idea about where you can find these places. So we could always, like Michael said, we could be in area studies departments like he was in Middle East studies, or some of these still called Near Eastern studies. You could find us in divinity schools or philosophy departments or history departments some places, or religious studies departments, or probably some other, Brown has an archaeological institute and Egyptology and Assyriology, which are all, or some of them are separate departments from one another. So, and Judaic studies or things of that sort. So just a note to kind of start out with that, talking about religion in the ancient world is quite broad.
Yeah, and I guess the thing that brought us together, right, was like the conceptual language that we bring to bear on our different topics.
So Lauren asks, why do we say still called? What is still called? Yes, controversial questions are fun. Why do we say still called? Why would departments change their titles? So some departments have changed titles, not just departments, but some organizations. The Harvard Semitic Museum what did it just change its name to?
Oh, I don't remember off the top of my head.
Harvard just changed the name of their museum. ASOR, which is one of my at least bigger organizations, national organizations that I'm a part of, which stood for the American Schools of Oriental Research, just recently changed its name. Well, they haven't decided what it's changed to yet. Now it's just ASOR. But a lot of these are Western titles, so Oriental Definitely a Western title, Harvard Museum of the Ancient Near East. There we go. And then even departments like the ones we've been a part of, or things that like we study, like I study the ancient Near East is a term that some people don't feel is appropriate to use anymore, for reasons of Western perspectives. Nowadays, a lot of people are using terms like ancient West Asia and North Africa just because they're geographic terms that hold no Westernization as a part of them.
Yeah, apparently more precise terms, right?
Yeah, more precise terms. Yeah, sometimes a bit clunkier to use when you're writing and giving papers and things of that sort. But a good move, I think, a move which is still slowly taking place. I believe. Yeah. So we talked a minute about the ancient title. Do you want to talk about the other word in our title, religion?
I mean, religion.
Yeah.
Well, I guess one thing that I could ask you is like, how do you actually use the word religion? Like as a, not even just sort of like, how do you think about religion, but how do you use like religion as a word in your own work?
In my own work?
Yeah.
I don't.
I don't either. It doesn't appear in my work. It's not something that, I mean, I talk about like religious practices,
Yeah,
to sort of like move to things in the world. And I think that that's a lot of what we did as a part of our department, right? To sort of look at it as a thing that was done,
right.
Which is, I think, a big part of the quibbling about the idea of whether or not religion as a concept existed in antiquity.
Yeah, I think that's pretty spot on for the way that I think about it. I definitely think about practices or things, now it's becoming much more popular to talk about things like lived religion or experiential religion and things of that sort, which are very apt terms, but it's hard when you're studying ancient cultures to talk about things like belief or faith, all these words which people kind of throw under the religion umbrella in the modern world, which either didn't exist and are just kind of anachronistic to use for the periods that we study, or are just impossible to discern. Even if they did exist, what can we say? We can't go interview somebody from ancient Iraq, unfortunately. So yeah, I think you're spot on that it's the way that I look at it is much more in the sense of practice and performance and material culture, things that are left behind that that we commonly throw under the problematic ritual heading, which is just as problematic as the religion term, but things of that sort. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, I asked you how you used it, and you don't really.
Now, I had a moment where I was going, I think we talked about this the other day. I had a moment, or maybe this morning, where I was going to use religious imperialism as like, that's what I look at. And I think that is a fair term to use in modern times, but I got a lot of pushback and ended up switching to taking out the word religion and plugging in just as problematic of a term, culture, but is at least something that we can say existed without a problem. There was a culture of
whatever that means,
Israel, whatever it was, and whatever that means. I mean, that's a whole another track to go down. You can read the intro to my.
I look forward to it.
No, you probably shouldn't. You'll fall asleep. But yeah. Well, there's some questions. Eric asks, a quick search of my Anki flashcards, Middle Egyptian, Hittite, Coptic, shows many words related to religion, e.g. God, divine, etc., but not a word for religion. Did ancient Near Eastern cultures conceive of religion as we do? For example, were there religious wars or crusades in those cultures? That is a very good question. Do you want to go or you want me to go? We can both go, but who wants to start?
You can start.
Yeah, so there would not be, in those languages specifically, there is not a term for the word religion, but there, as you say, very rightfully so, are words for things like God, divine, even if they're just in something like Hittite or Sumerian or Akkadian, there would be like a marker that shows, not a word that you would necessarily translate, but a sign that shows, this thing after this is divine. So I would say, to your first question, did ancient Near Eastern cultures conceive of religion as we do? I would say no. I don't, it's very easy, the common easy talking point when you get a question like this, which we deal with a lot, and I still don't know the best way to answer it, is to just say things like, well, you can't separate religion from society like we can, from normal everyday society like we can today, which is the common thing that people say, and then you just move on. It's not as clear cut as that, for sure. I don't think, at least Michael might disagree with me. There are definitely divisions between, in my opinion, divisions between sacred things and acts and places and profane, everyday, normal things and acts and places. So I do think that categorization existed, but not in the same way that it exists today. Do you want to answer that one, and then we'll take the second part of that question in a second, but do you want to take that first part?
Yeah. So I mean, like our modern conception of religion, right, at least certainly as it does in North America, really prioritizes faith, as we mentioned before. And, there's no reason to think that was similarly prioritized in ancient Near Eastern cultures or in ancient Near Eastern groups. And so, like, for instance, in Arabic, right, like you have a lot of terms for, like, what we might call religious groups or communities. There are ways that you can sort of label different groups or communities. There are ways that you can talk about something, having to do with God or having not to do with God. But the word that's most often used for religion, deen, also it could just be understood to mean sort of like law or a sort of a set of judgments that are sort of to be adhered to and are to be lived in a particular way. And different groups have different, a different deen. And so I think that is distinct from our modern notion of religion, but at the same time, it's not to say that just because the words are different, that a religious life would look so totally different, or it should be understood to be something totally different.
Yeah, for sure. So the second part here, were there religious wars or crusades in those cultures? So that is a good question and a hard question to answer. So you kind of got to get into some conceptions of what deities were like to answer that. And on one hand, I think it's fair to say that maybe not broadly, but for the most part, deities in the ancient world, or in the ancient Near East specifically, were confined to geographic spaces. So even if you went to some other part of the world and battled against those people, the god not kind of still functioned there in some sense, because that was just their territory. On the other hand, you have instances of things like when the Neo-Assyrians go into the Levant in the Iron Age, one thing that they do to their kind of, not so much their vassal states, but to their colony type states, for lack of a better word, is that they make sure that they give offerings to the god Ashur, who's the main god of Assyria. So that wasn't really an answer to that at all. Religious war, I think religion, in the way that to make sure we're still using the term religion, since that was part of the question, I think is so tied in together with ideology of certain cultures and certain civilizations that if you were able to ask someone from ancient Mesopotamia, you're going out on this military campaign, are you doing this in the name of Ashur? They would say yes. But if you were like, are you doing this to take over, to impose Ashur worship on those people? The answer would be no. It's ideologically, for places like Egypt in the late Bronze Age, or for Assyria in the Iron Age. I think it's mainly just about territorial expansion and control of the world, which is tied together with religion, but is also just political, and it's just power and things of that sort. Yeah, that's my rambling answer for that.
Yeah, and just to sort of build on that, like in my, context, which is, the other end of antiquity, right? You certainly see the invocation of God, right, when it comes to warfare, when it comes to violence. But, as we've been saying, right, to say that it's religious war, religion as we understand it was so bound up in everything that I don't know if it makes sense to sort of talk about religious warfare as, sort of separate from like some sort of secular notion of warfare. Because even if people were doing things for gain, they would certainly invoke God in justifying what it was that they were doing, because the place for religious life at that point was, I mean, you think that it's somehow separable, and it is, right? You have sacred things and you have not sacred things, but in a broad sense, religion entered into people's lives in a lot of ways that we can't differentiate like we want to in our modern context.
For sure. Yeah, I think one thing to just point out is that, you're not seeking, not that something like the Crusades necessarily was either, you're not seeking land in order to convert people, or because that land itself is holy or something like that. When you're going out to war, you're not trying to go to the Levant. If you're Mesopotamia, you're not trying to take control of Israel because Israel is holy land, like, maybe the Christians were during the Crusades, right? It's just, you're taking it for practical reasons. Like, it's the buffer area between other major powers, or they have natural resources that will help make you wealthier and more powerful. So for the most part, these are broad statements. So if there is no other question, what would you like to discuss?
Well, so I guess, okay. So we talked a little bit about the way that we use the word religion. I was wondering if we could talk a little bit. Right. Well, I was wondering if we could just talk a little bit about the other sort of conceptual quibbles that we have in terms of like word usage, like in our field. So you were talking a little bit about like the problem of the word culture, or the problem of the word empire. I was just wondering if you could say a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, the term that I've been pushing back, or the two terms, I guess, that I've been pushing back against in my work over the last year and a half to 2 years, are the terms empire and imperialism, which have kind of taken on a life of their own in ancient Near Eastern studies, where they're not even, only recently at a conference I presented at last year, only recently have they been kind of starting to be questioned about whether these terms should be used. So they've just become so genericized, almost in the sense of like the Neo-Assyrian Empire or the Egyptian Empire, or these things that like it doesn't mean anything anymore. And I have a term to ask you about that doesn't mean anything anymore too. But yeah, so I think that is a lot of honestly what we do in our fields, are try to think of new frameworks and new paradigms by which to examine things that have already been examined, right? A lot of times, in both of our fields, there are new things coming out. There is new evidence and new text and new archaeological sites, those coming out every day. But
yeah,
rarely is it life-altering, paradigm-shifting stuff. It does happen, but it's rare. So what we're left to do is plug in new information to something that's already been studied 50 times. And the way to do that is to ask new questions and use new theoretical models. And yeah, the one that, kind of the way that I've been trending is saying that imperialism and empire are anachronistic terms. They are colonialist terms, which is another term that I have a big problem with looking at the ancient world, and a term that's used a good bit, and instead talking about things that we can actually observe in the sense of what I'm calling cultural hegemony. I am using models which are from modern anthropological and sociological fields of cultural imperialism, and changing them around a little bit to serve my own interest. But it's something that I think can be measured and can be looked at. You can look and say, during these years where the Neo-Assyrians were in charge of the Levant, what did they actually do? Not what were they saying they did back in Nineveh. Not what were they saying, I'm so great, look at what I did in Israel that nobody could ever go check and verify. It's looking at the stuff there and saying, well, what did they do? And then importantly for me, what did they do that was observable to, John Doe on the street? Not just things that were observable by the king and the elites, but did your normal everyday dude living in Jerusalem in 700 BCE or whatever, maybe not, he would have known then because they were under siege. But in 650 BCE, did he even know that they were vassals to the Neo-Assyrian Empire? Would that have even been something that was present at anywhere in all the land, right? So there are ways to look and say, was there a Neo-Assyrian presence in the sense of, were Mesopotamian rituals being performed, or was there Mesopotamian iconography around? And for the most part, a lot of times the answer is no. So the message that is being said I hate these words, but at the core of the empire, is something different than
periphery. You don't like that?
Oh, don't get me started. We have a book coming out on that as well. But is something that what was being said in the core is something that is different than what appears to have actually been happening in the periphery. So that is why I have kind of a problem with this empire imperialism term. I see we have a question, but do you want to respond to that? I'll leave culture alone for right now, but I have a term question for you that we can come back to.
But culture really deserves unpacking. But yeah, let's turn to the question. I don't have an answer for it, but I'd like to hear what you have to say about the question.
Question from, hi, Mike. I'm assuming that's you. I have a question. Are there any ancient holidays that celebrate alleged virgin birth like modern day Christianity? Do you have a? No,
I don't have any particular knowledge of any other holidays or events or rituals that celebrate something like this. Which isn't to say that it doesn't exist, but it doesn't fall within what I study.
So we have evidence of, and this is a good bit of this is pretty outside of my wheelhouse too. We have evidence of virgin conceptions and virgin births in other cultures. We have that in Egypt. We have that with, I believe, even like Romulus and Remus in Rome. That could, I think. Those are usually with, so this is gonna, I hope this doesn't piss people off, but in like Egypt, those are with gods, right? It's not necessarily humans. In Rome, I guess those are still kind of mythological people. Jesus is not really characterized as mythological for the most part. So I wouldn't say while we have virgin births and virgin conceptions and things of that sort in other cultures, the holiday part is not something that I think we have. Is that, what do you think about that? Is that, I can't think of a holiday that's celebrated like that.
No, and that's the thing that makes it tricky, right? Because I know of like other stories or like other accounts of things like that, but a story isn't a holiday, right. Isn't a ritual, isn't right. An event. Let's see. Do you want to read the next question that we got?
You want to take it?
Okay, let's see. So, did religious practice strive to govern person-to-person interaction, for example, giving to the poor, Good Samaritan practice, or was it mostly about a person's relationship with the gods?
That's a good question too.
Yeah.
You want to take it? You want me to take it? Or we both?
Yeah, so I can start out. I mean, I don't have a definitive or single answer for this, but I can talk about a little bit about it in my own context. So I know, for instance, that that religious practice as it existed, for instance, in early Islamic Iraq, right? It was about sort of developing a sort of kind of ethical subject, right? It was sort of governing and dictating and informing how you interacted with other people. But that doesn't mean that it didn't have to do with one's relationship to God. And I think that there were certainly things which, you could call religious practices that weren't directly impacting the way that someone would, encounter and deal with another person. But I think that a lot of things which, we might simply say were ethics or were, social norms were very much bound up in religious practice.
Yeah, this is another one where the religion term gets a little dicey in the sense of just looking at the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. We have plenty of statements about person-to-person interaction. Just even in the Ten Commandments, just to say something pretty well known. But yeah, is that in some ways those are more reflective of the relationship that you're supposed to have with God. So in one way, they're still about the relationship with God, but on the other hand, if you kind of divorce them a little bit from the context that we have them in now, which would be books that people still consider to be religious texts, if you divorce them a little bit, then you can say these are probably reflective of cultural norms, right? That would be an ethical precept or an ethical norm for the community from which they arise. So yeah, I think the answer to the question is a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Even if I would say this, sometimes it is recast to be talking about the relationship with God when it's really about personal stuff. I think sometimes when a text is being written, especially in a text, which we would in modern times deem to be religious by context and things of that sort, then yeah, it kind of just becomes religious, or kind of becomes about the relationship with God as opposed to the interpersonal relationship, when it's really reflective of both.
Do you want to take this question about core and periphery?
Yeah, so this is a pretty heated debate at the moment. Sarah Moore and I have an edited volume on this coming out hopefully by the summer, or touching on this hopefully by the summer. The problem with this core periphery model, which is still widely used and still does have some utility in some circles, is that it assumes, or it automatically kind of throws a geographic picture into everyone's head where there's, this is over here, that's the center, and over there is that. But at any given time to any given person, this is the core, or that's the periphery, and things of that sort. So it kind of becomes another one of these where these are terms which I would still use in my work to say if I'm talking about the Neo-Assyrians, and I would say their core, because to them that is the core, right? This is their core, that's their periphery, but they're also somebody else's periphery, right? So for broader discussions, those terms become a bit less useful. Does that make sense?
I think it does.
Do you engage with those terms really?
core and periphery. I think that I've occasionally used terms like metropole and stuff like that, to talk about like an imperial center, but it's only ever talking about a particular city. It's just as a quick way to talk about like the capital of an empire or something like that. But I do take your point that it's much more useful to think about the way that power accrues to individuals like broadly across the geography, and it's not sort of like concentrated in a particular place. And to talk about core and periphery assumes like a kind of distribution of power that you can't assume.
Right, for sure. Yeah. Did other cultures have anything like the Ten Commandments versus the Laws of Hammurabi? Yes. So from that time period, the Hittite law code is, in my opinion, even more so like the Ten Commandments than the Code of Hammurabi is, but they're all kind of in the same vein. So yeah, we do have other law codes. The question then becomes, especially with something like Hammurabi, was this some sort of idealized law code, or was this something that was ever actually practiced? That's a bit iffier to get at. Are there law codes from your time period really that we have, Michael?
Sort of. I mean, it depends what you mean by a law code, right? So like in my context, legal sort of jurisprudential writing looks a bit different. Like often it's very sort of esoteric theorizing, but the material that they're drawing on in an Islamic context to develop law is a little more diffuse, right? So you're using rules that are sort of gleaned from the Quran, and then you also have things within Hadith, which is the sort of diffuse corpus of sort of statements of the Prophet and observations of his behavior, and then often you would use analogy based on that to form rulings on particular things. But often this stuff wasn't totally or formally established in a concrete way, and it was sort of done more situationally, not always. But I think that that's qualitatively a bit different from something like the Law of Hammurabi.
Yeah. And there are other Mesopotamian law codes from earlier, like Ornamu and stuff like that. I'm posting there's a book, it's a book of text, but I'm putting the name of that book. It's called Law Collections from Mesopotamia and Asia Minor by Martha Roth, which is just a collection of texts. But if you're interested in that, law is something that is really interesting to study conceptually, and then these texts are so dry, but conceptually it's fun to discuss.
Yeah, and it's all, I guess, about what you're trying to get from it, right? Because often, you get a lot of idea about the way that people would reason legally. You get a sense of what norms might be, but what does that tell you about society? It's a little tricky.
Right. So I don't see any question while we wait. Do you want us? Well, before we do culture, since you asked me to, I'm going to ask you one that I have been thinking about lately, and I've discussed maybe with you in the past, but we've talked a little bit about ritual and practice and things like that. And I assume in your field as well, there is still a tendency to talk about things in Turner Van Getup rites of passage language, which we can expand on what that means in a second. But I wanted to maybe get your perspective on whether you thought that framework was still useful. Things like liminality are still useful concepts in our field, or have they become so commonly used that they've again kind of lost utility? So
I would say that something like to talk about the liminality of people or ideas or anything like that. I think that for that particular term, for instance, I think that it no longer has that specificity that it once did. It's sort of everywhere and thus nowhere, and it doesn't do the work that it used to. Why don't you tell people what you mean when you talk about Turner?
Yeah, so Arnold van Gennep and Victor Turner, two theorists from the early to mid 20th century, who kind of both worked in this framework of rites of passage, where there's kind of just three, the very simplified version is rituals, not all rituals, but many rituals and many things in life kind of have three stages. And one of them is, kind of the pre-stage. Then there is this second liminal stage where you're kind of in flux. And then the third stage is this kind of new state. So the example I always give when I talk about this in class is something like a, bar mitzvah or something, where like you start as a child, you go through the ceremony where you're kind of changing, right? And then you come out the other side and you're an adult member of the Jewish community, right? There's plenty of these kinds of things. They're commonly connected or commonly discussed in these kind of child to adult ceremonies in indigenous cultures from around the world. Like you see this in Native American culture and in African indigenous religions and things of that sort. But you have them in Christianity with things like confirmation and all the but they don't even have to be religious, right? In U.S. culture, something like a Sweet 16 birthday party almost serves as one of these events in America. We can talk about American religion too, right? But it's just because it's become a term that still is useful because we know what it means, but it's almost something that is applicable to everything if you twist and turn it the right way. And it's still just something that you see all the time. A rites of passage reading of X. So yes, this is the word I wanted to ask
about liminal specifically, or right,
or even just rites of passage. So this whole category, has it lost utility?
Well, so it's funny because, like, on the one hand, this is a lens that you can sort of turn on anything, right? And you can see, I'm not going to say you can see whatever you want with it, but you can see a lot of different things with it, right? And yet, in my particular subfield within the study of the ancient world and the study of religion, this kind of language, this sort of strain of anthropological language, hasn't really entered into the discussion very much. For whatever reason, if you look at secondary literature in early Islamic studies, you won't find a lot of references to rites of passage or liminality or anything like that. It's not that anthropology doesn't have a place in early Islamic studies at all, but it's, I guess, more so that the norms in my subfield are more sort of conservative and philologically driven.
Right. All right, so we can circle back now to your other question. So culture.
Yeah.
Man, I don't even know at this point if I have a definite. Well, what is your question? Is how would I define it, or how would I use it?
Yeah, or why is it that culture is preferable to something like religion, for instance? Because I think that, like, both are useful to sort of quickly hint at something that we vaguely know what it might be, and yet there's a certain imprecision to it that makes it a difficult tool to use. And so I was just wondering why you think that it's less unwieldy than religion.
So here's the kind of comparison to something modern that I would make, that I don't make this in my writing, but I kind of made this comparison in my head as like, okay, this is why I'm going to use this term. So if you look at something like, and I know this is not a thing that either one of us really study, but if you look at something like Shinto in modern Japan, from, again, not something that I study, but from my engagement with that in the past in coursework and I think we both engage with anthropological and religious studies of religions that we do not study. So that's a common thing. So in my engagement with Shinto, I would say that it is fair to call it, in Western terms, a religion, but that most practitioners of Shinto would probably not consider going to a Shinto shrine to be a religious act, or their worship, their whatever engagement with Shinto and with kami and spirits and things like that to be religious. And that's kind of, I think, and it's obviously not an exact comparison by any means, but kind of an apt comparison to make with at least my part of the ancient world, where on some level it is just something that is part of daily life. So it's not necessarily something that is special at all times, right? Whereas, I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but it is just as muddy of a term, if not even a muddier term than religion. That's for sure. It's not necessarily that I think culture is not a problematic term. Yes, everything is ritual, that is for sure. It's not necessarily that I think culture is not a problematic term. I think it's one that we're going to have to deal with in our field in the next decade or two. But for now, I think it's more important for us to not use religion to talk about everything.
And I totally agree that we can't use it to talk about everything. But I mean, aren't we in danger then of, if we're trying to be circumspect about how we use religion, are we just using culture in a way that it applies to everything? Like, what isn't cultural if, we want to sort of apply it broadly?
I think that's fair. I mean, I know the way that I use it in the sense of, I use it more in terms of, I kind of touched on this a little earlier, but in the sense of reflections of ideology, which can be in modern terms both religious and not religious. It could be political or social or religious if we're breaking things up into that. So I do think culture is broader even than religion, which is, religion is already super broad. So I do think it's broader. But as people that study religion, I mean, we don't just study religion. So
sure, right.
I think it's fair, when we talk about, and I know this is something that both of us kind of do, we're looking at religion as it relates to things like power structures. Well, that branches into social dynamics and social and political hierarchies and things of that sort, which do stem into cultural areas which we would not deem in any sense to be religious areas. So it is more a broadening for my purposes, as well as a conscious decision to not use the word religious. But if I was looking at things that I 100% agreed, yes, these are religious, I don't know what term I'd use. I would use religion. I don't know if there's a better term to use, but I think most of the time we're looking at things that would branch out also outside of religion. So it's fair to use some other terminologies.
Yeah, I guess I often just shy away from these kinds of categories as much as possible, to not talk about something as being religious, to not talk about it being cultural, but just to talk about it and to try to describe it without these kinds of, I mean, obviously in language, you have to use some broad terms, but they're ones that we can avoid, I guess. And, we're people who study religion and culture, and we, or at least I, try to avoid using those words.
Don't talk about those terms. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the question is, can you discuss the ancient and or historical ties between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and why we think those ties seem to be lost to Americans, especially in modern times? That's a very good question for two people who do not study modern things, but we
live in a world that might be called modern. So.
Yeah, we obviously understand the implications of what we study for modern things. Do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, so I can just sort of start with it. So I think that it partly depends what we mean by ties, right? Because there are, for instance, I study a lot of texts in the 9th century, and you'll have Muslim authors who know a lot about Christianity or Judaism, and they'll write about it, right? And so they'll sort of use concepts drawn from Christianity and Judaism to talk about various different things. They clearly know and interact with Jews and Christians. But if we want to sort of think, instead of just like reference and encounter, but instead to sort of talk about, I don't know, like a different kind of tie, a different kind of thing binding things together, right? I mean, so like there are, shared practices. They often exist in shared spaces. They, in different contexts used shared language. And, I think that we can sort of create these sharp boundaries a lot of the time when we're talking about Judaism or Islam or Christianity in ways that exclude or obscure the way that, a Jewish person lived in a world where they might be surrounded by Muslims or Christians and so forth. And to just sort of keep in mind that that if we sort of, hew too closely to these kinds of categorical boundaries between the study of Judaism and Christianity and Islam, for instance, that you'll lose sight of the fact that these people were interacting and living in the world together.
Yeah, I'll take a bit bigger picture thing and just the ancient and historical ties. I mean, just very generally, Judaism is the oldest in some sense of this. When Judaism as a term comes about, or when we can start using that, as a whole nother debate. But Christianity begins as a sect of Judaism. Clearly, it begins being practiced in places like synagogues. It is clearly, probably for 200 to 300 or maybe even 400 years, considered by Christians at least to be a sect of Judaism. And then after that, really probably around the time when it becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire, does it, 100, is it 100% categorically separate from Judaism? Islam, we see its acknowledgement that there are shared similarities between the three, and even in kind of the periods that Michael studies, we have things like Jews and Christians being protected categories of people. These people of the book, what are they called, dhimmis or something like that in that period?
Yeah, I mean, those are related but slightly different concepts. Yeah,
right, yeah, different concepts, but yeah, they have this kind of protected-ish social political category. So there's an acknowledgement among the three, or at least among Islam and Judaism for most of the time, once you get past kind of the 4th or 5th century, that there is a connection that gets lost probably, in medieval Europe, and then with pressures on the Muslim Empire pushing back, their reactions towards foreign people start to change, as well, towards non-Muslims. I would think that's kind of in reaction. Again, not a period which I super study, but why, that second part of the question is tough. Why do these ties seem to be lost to Americans, especially in modern times? I would say firsthand, I would say I'm not 100% sure that they are lost in all cases. I think there is a pretty open acknowledgement by Christian, I'll try to say this in the most there's a pretty open acknowledgement by by American Christians of the relationship between Christianity and Judaism, and I think you can see that pretty explicitly in the kind of pro-Israel attitude that is kind of held by a lot of evangelical Christian groups. Again, not something that I study. The Islam question is, obviously we see the connection there. It's kind of hard to miss it, but it's something that is easily dismissed, I would say. I don't know if Michael can touch on that maybe more than I can.
Well, I mean, just to give a quick answer, like I think as to why are these ties lost on sort of modern people, right? I think that it has to do with historical literacy, right? I
Yeah.
think that if people knew more, they would have more instances in mind of ways in which there are overlap or ways in which there are commonalities. But people don't know about these, so these sort of things that might tie things together just don't exist in people's minds.
Yeah. I think we nailed that one without making anybody angry.
Well,
So,
who knows?
Yes. So if per historical literacy, take college classes on these subjects.
Yes.
Anyways, a preferred reference for religion in the ancient world. Is that like a book question? Like a book reference? Is that what it's
I
asking?
assume it is.
Man, something broad. It'd
Well,
probably
I mean,
be,
if it's,
sorry, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, if it's like religion as a concept, right? You have something like you have Brent Nongbree's Before Religion, or you have Daniel Boyarin's and Carlin Barton's book, Imagine No Religion. And those are sort of good ways to think about like religion as a category in antiquity. But if you want to think about like religion as it was lived in the world, I don't know of any sort of single reference. I mean, so like personally, I think that reading, the books of Peter Brown and what he has to write about late antiquity, you get a really good sense of religion as it existed in the ancient Mediterranean, especially in late antiquity, obviously. Talking about the lives of saints and so forth. But what kinds of books would you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, if it's asking for more, if the question is asking for more kind of specific, religion in the ancient world, what is it like, and things of that sort, I think you'd be piecing things together, like a religion in ancient Egypt book, of which there are several good ones. There are several good books on ancient Israelite religion. When you get in, same with Hittite. But I think the interesting thing is, even for my comprehensive exams on my seriology ones, we still had to read things like Oppenheim's I'm probably going to butcher the title a little bit, but I think it's something like Why a Mesopotamian Religion Should Not Be Written, because these things are not static, right? These civilizations that we talk about existed over hundreds, if not thousands of years, and then we talk about them as if they're kind of a monolith. That didn't change. So there aren't a lot of books out there that attempt to do something like religion in the ancient world, because it would be a risky proposition to take on. Unlike you see world religion books and modern stuff, just a dime a dozen out there. We don't really have those when it gets to ancient stuff, and it's not because people aren't interested in doing it. It's kind of just because it's a gigantic task to take, and then you have to pick what is religion and what isn't, and that's a risky thing too. So I would suggest, and feel free to email me about this, suggest kind of narrowing down the cultures that you would be the most interested in, and reading the religion books about those particular cultures and kind of piecing them together. I mean, you're gonna get sections in something like Mark van der Merup's whatever it's called, History and Culture of the Ancient Near East. There's several of those. I think he has an Ancient Egypt one too, where religion is a major part of that, but it's kind of combined, and kind of like the way we've been talking about, it's not separated out really from the history and from the politics and things of that sort. So it's kind of a pieced together proposition.
Yeah, you just sort of have to jump into everything if you want the whole picture.
Right. We have a lapse in questions. What would you like to discuss?
I don't know. What comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I don't know. We can talk about whatever. Holidays.
Holidays. Okay. So what do you have to say about holidays?
I mean, the ones that are very present right now, for people who aren't really familiar with it, I do think it, especially for American culture, is important to maybe note, this is considered the holiday season. I just always think it's kind of interesting to note that Hanukkah, which has kind of been equated with Christmas by most, Christian Americans, is first and foremost not a major holiday in Judaism. And that I say that in the sense that is a major with a capital M. There are a set of quote unquote major holidays. It is not one of those. It is a relatively minor holiday that kind of signifies this event during the Maccabean revolt in the 160s BCE, when they, the Maccabees and the Jewish folks in the Levant kind of take back the temple from the Romans, who have turned it into a Roman temple for a short time. And then, they don't have any oil, and they light the lamp and it burns for 8 days or whatever. But it's, I just think it's interesting to note for this holiday season that I think most people would probably consider, if you asked, a normal everyday person on the street, what is the Jewish holiday that you know off the top of your head, most people would say Hanukkah, and I would assume that it is the most important Jewish holiday, while it is assuredly not. So I think that's a point to make about this. What is, what is the probably Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah. So Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, or Rosh Hashanah, the literally the head of the year, the Jewish New Year. But there are other major ones, like Sukkot is a major holiday. But then you have some, that aren't necessarily major holidays, but that symbolize somewhere, some very, very important things, like Tisha B'Av, which is kind of a, it literally stands for the ninth of the month of Av in the Babylonian calendar, which is presumably when the Babylonians destroyed the first temple in 587, but has come to kind of represent all Jewish catastrophes and bad things that have happened over the course of Jewish history. So that is it's a very somber holiday. But yeah, there are quite a few Jewish holidays. Are those associated with any other religious holidays? The Jewish ones I say, no. Oh, I said Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. Pesach, Passover is also up there, the celebration or remembrance of the Exodus story. Those are some of these made with other religious holidays. So some of them, I'll point out one that not with modern ones, but something like Sukkot, this festival of booths, probably connected just with originally an ancient agricultural festival, which presumably would have been something celebrated in all manner of cultures in the ancient world. I mean, agricultural festivals are far and away the most common ancient holiday is not necessary. The weird word to use. Ritual, religious celebration. I don't know. But yeah, so you would assume that lines up with some of these line up with things like the solstices or the harvest and things of that sort. Can you think of what is a holiday to an ancient person? Oh man, versus a festival. I don't think we have a word for holiday.
I mean, is holiday a word that you see used in scholarship in your subfield? Because holiday isn't a word that I think that I encounter personally.
No, but I mean, I assume the etymology of the word is holy day.
No, sure, and they're important days. They're
right. So I mean, I guess literally you could say that it probably originates as something related to the Sabbath and Shabbat on a weekly basis. So you could say, what is a holiday? I wouldn't consider Shabbat to be a festival. It's a weekly thing that is extremely important. It is still in some parts of the Middle East the one day of the week that you have off. So I think that would be a holiday, whereas most festivals, the way that I study festivals, which I do work on a good bit, festivals in the sense of some sort of spectacle, which, to not get to like 19 teens Durkheimian or something, to some sort of communal sort of bring everyone together kind of thing, and let's kind of reinforce our community values. So I think there are things that I don't think I've seen this term used a lot, but I think something like Shabbat could rightfully be considered a holiday, whereas in comparison with something like a festival, something like a Passover. Well, I don't even know if I consider that a festival, but a religious observance that is differentiated. What do you got here?
Should I read this question?
Sure.
Okay, so I'll read the first part. So, is there any generic methods to use to study changes in the approach of religion in a specific period?
The next one, part of that. I think the second question might be part of that same question.
Oh, okay, fair. Yeah. So, how do you state that there is a point at which a population shifts behavior or rituals regarding those of their ancestors? So, yeah. So, do you have generic suggestions about something like that?
Yeah, I mean, there are different ways things like this can happen. I mean, they can be slow changes over time, right? Or they can be extremely quick. I mean, the kind of poster child example for the quick change is something like the Amarna period and Akhenaten and everything in ancient Egypt, where all of a sudden they're worship, they kind of get rid of all the ancient gods and are just worshiping the Aten, but then it all kind of switches back quickly. So I mean, I think a lot of times these things coincide with kind of, again, to reinforce the like religion doesn't stand apart from these things, they coincide with a new ruler coming to power, or a new, in modern times, maybe a new political party coming to power, or a new priesthood coming to power, or a shift in the capital city, things of that sort. So while some things can be slow, like the development of mythology, switches can be fast. I don't even in cases like the Amarna period, where as soon as Akhenaten dies, it's basically all overturned. It's not like ancestral practices were forgotten or gotten rid of. They're just done in a maybe private way, not public anymore. I don't know. That's a good question. It's a tough one to think about. What are your thoughts on that one?
Well, so as to like marking like a shift in ruler and observing certain things that are happening at like a higher elite level, right? So, and what I study, people like to use numismatics. So they'll look at coins, to look at the way that the ruler is depicted, or the title that he's taking, or the images that they're using. But that's all happening at like a very high level, right? So, and when it comes to like what like a population is doing, by which I assume that we mean like more than just elites, right? I think that for at least what I do presently, we're relying heavily on literary representations in history texts, basically. There's some material culture that we can use in certain places, but at least in what I do, I don't think that archaeology has been used a great deal to answer these kinds of questions about like shifts in behavior. Though I guess like one particular kind of thing that I can think of is that you can sort of see different ways that mosques, for instance, were constructed. Like the different sort of directions of prayer or the precision of the direction of prayer. You can sort of look at ruins to figure something like that out. But to like pinpoint like a moment of change, I think something like that it's hard to come up with like a generic methodology to do something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think another example that comes to mind is something like the slow shift to monotheism in ancient Israel is something that comes to mind. And like Michael said, we try to use both text and archaeology, so text and material culture. On the non-elite level, we don't normally, at least in my periods, have any, or usually not any non-really elite text. But we have things like domestic archaeology, and it's interesting to see what's in households and what kind of little statues and figurines and stuff people have. That doesn't mean we can always interpret what they mean. So the kind of prime example for this, kind of tied in with the monotheism thing, is the prevalence of Judean pillar figurines, these little what some people call Asherah figurines, these little goddess figurines that are found pretty commonly in Iron Age Israelite homes, which we assume, or most people assume, represents Yahweh's consort goddess Asherah, which we do have mentions of in the Hebrew Bible. They're all negative, but you assume that they're negative because people are actually engaging in this practice. And then all of a sudden over time, they kind of cease to exist. And in the text, in the Hebrew Bible text, we don't have mentions of Asherah after a certain point. We do still have them other places in like Phoenician texts. But so these things they're usually slow changes, and you have to, that's why we say religious studies is a disparate field, in that we're people who learn a bunch of languages to read a bunch of texts, but we also have to, we also deal with archaeology, and we deal with socioanthropological approaches to these things. So we're a motley crew with a lot of tools in our tool belt that hopefully we know how to use when we need them.
I guess while we wait for another question to come in, do you self-consciously acknowledge in your work that what you study is elite culture? Do you talk about elites, or is that like a category that you use?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'm really trying to do is to look at what we can even say about non-elites. So I'm very much talk about elite versus non-elite culture, which is why I tend to prioritize, for lack of a better word, public kind of archaeological evidence. So in the sense of things that would have been observed and interacted with by everyone. So things that aren't in the palace and things of that sort, and tend to prioritize on the textual side, kind of prescriptive, festival-y type ritual text. So things that presumably would have either been participated in or observed by people from all levels of society. So yeah, it is tough to get past the kind of elite barrier for sure. I'm sure there are other ways to kind of think about it than I am. What I'm for the current projects that I'm working on, it's working for the most part to at least try to answer the questions that I have. I'm not sure it's something that I will always kind of take that approach to, but it's the one I'm using now, because I do think when you read stuff about the ancient world, 99% of what you read is about the elites. Even if it's claiming to be, even if it's not using that language, that's all, in a lot of cases, that's all we can talk about. So yeah, I think it's important to be upfront about that. Do you have those same pronounced problems in your field?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, so definitely like in my field, and even more particularly for what I study. I mean, like, you could even say that what I study is like court culture. And, even if it's not actually happening at court, it's happening in the salons and homes of elite people, or it's, maybe it's elite people going to a Christian monastery and getting drunk, but it's still somehow social elites, right? Whatever it is that means. And, I try to acknowledge that as much as possible in my work, but along with every other word that we've been talking about, there's a certain kind of fuzziness to it, right? Like there's no firm boundary between, elite and non-elite. A lot of it is sort of rhetorically constructed in the text that I look at, where it talks about, the common people being ignorant or whatever else, and presumably the person who's saying that considers themselves to be a part of the elite. But it's it's something that we have to acknowledge in our work, though, that there's a limited, we're only getting sort of a limited view of the societies that we're trying to talk about through the texts and the material culture that we're looking at. Material culture is probably one of the better ways to get beyond that. But at least in my particular subfield, that's not as well developed at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, even sometimes it's even more more narrow than we think about, because it's not only just elites. Sometimes it's only elites in the capital city, in the palace, right? Or things like that, because presumably there are elites of some sort in every little urban area, but some, if they don't have a text, text that were preserved or things of that sort. And sometimes that's a problem on the modern side, in the sense of that was some little place out in the countryside that we don't have the funds to go excavate. And that's why we don't have the evidence of those people. It's not necessarily that the evidence isn't there, it's that we can't get the backing to go get it. The fun one that I like to say is, like, if you want a snapshot of what we don't know about the ancient world, there were 4, I'll use the word, just the major empires in the late Bronze Age. The Egyptians, the Hittites, the Mesopotamia, the Assyrians, and the Hurrians. We didn't know the Hittites were even real people until the 19th century, and we still don't even know where the capital of the Hurrian Empire was. We don't have it. Washington, we haven't even found it. So these snapshots that we have are at times extremely, extremely small. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and just sort of building off one of the things that you mentioned, that we have these source issues where we have certain texts, but it's just what was preserved, right? There are just all of these things that weren't copied, right, or weren't sort of copied and then copied and so forth. But on top of that, at least in what I do, they're just untold manuscripts that haven't been edited yet, partly because of the way that things are kind of teleologically determined, right, in terms of what people are interested in, they think other people are interested in, and it neglects wide swaths of potential data. And so what you're getting, right, is this sort of truncated vision of the past.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there are, and people would probably be at horror to know this, but if you go in the back rooms of some of these museums, big or small, around the world, there are just boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff that nobody has looked at since it was taken out of the ground. And sometimes that was over 100 years ago, and it's been sitting in a box in the back of the museum since then, and nobody's looked at it since then. I mean, so yeah, selective on where we even go to find our evidence, and then selective on what we even do once we have said evidence.
And as I understand it, often in order to get some of that evidence that was underground, evidence that might have been interesting to me that was at a higher level was just destroyed. But So it's all a matter of
I've
what's
been guilty
useful.
of that. It was by the order of someone else.
Okay, well,
But yeah, I mean that's a good point to make, though, is that, I make this in my archaeology classes, is that, we like to think of archaeology as preservative, where on one hand it is also destructive. You're destroying evidence to get to the next level at every time, and you have to make that decision about, well, now we're at the Islamic period at this site. If we want to get to the Greco-Roman period, or if we want to get to the Iron Age, or if we want to get to the Late Bronze Age, you got to destroy the Islamic period to get to Greco-Roman. You got to just, get rid of the Greco-Roman period, and you hope you took good pictures and made good notes, because after that, it's gone forever. So yeah, that's a good point to make. I think we're in our last 8 or so minutes. If there are other questions out there for us to, any links or anything you want to send out? I don't know.
You don't have anything you want to share?
Is there anything I want to share? No. If there's stuff people want sent out, I can send it out, or people can always email me. Lauren, you can send out my email address if you would like.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to come back for a second and talk about some other SASA stuff then. If you guys, unless you have any other points that you've been dying to bring up that you're not allowed to in your classes or something,
There's some more questions.
Oh yeah, here's a couple more questions. I will talk about some SASA reading groups and stuff right at the end of this session. So of course, go and answer these questions though.
Okay, what are museum curators doing with the boxes and boxes? Probably nothing. Hopefully they have been cataloged and they know that they're even there, because sometimes you find a record from 1915 that something was brought in and there's no record of it since then, and you hope it's still in the box that it was in then. And sometimes you get to that and it's what was preserving it was the sand and the dirt and the dust and the mud, and now it's destroyed. So you see problems like this. Not necessarily with this boxes question, but things like even 50 years ago, people working on like the Dead Sea Scrolls thought they were preserving these things by gluing them down. Well, we know now that that is not the case at all. They are destroying these objects by gluing them down. So yeah, what museum curators are doing with these boxes is it's usually nothing, and hoping that somebody gets a grant, who wants to work on the text or the objects from that site, from that dig, and they come in and deal with it whenever they deal with it. Do you have a different opinion on museum curators doing something with these?
No, but I mean, as to the new technological tool question, so I don't have an answer about the ways that technological tools might determine how these things are being stored or what to prefer or anything like that. Though I can say that technological advances, certainly, at least in my subfield in the last 20 plus years, have changed the way that we've approached things like papyri, for instance, just in terms of the way that we've been able to look at different layers and palimpsests, and to sort of by using new imaging technology and stuff like that. So things which seemed as though we'd gotten everything that we could from them in terms of data. There's actually like more to be had, even from things that people have actually interacted with and studied.
Yeah, for sure. Technological advances, across the board have been huge. They're new ones made all the time. Yeah, especially with text, things like reading traces of letters and ink that you didn't know was there. We've been able to read things that were previously burned and stuff like that. You can take imaging pictures of those and kind of get the ink on them. You can read, in some cases, scrolls that are too fragile to unroll. They've come up with new ways to look at those sorts of things, and new ways to, you know, not with text, but I mean, I guess with text as well, but to look at the chemical makeup and dates and all these sorts of things. So yeah, technological tools are certainly helpful. Another way that, you know, if you're not necessarily like, don't want to be a religion major, but still want to deal with, or an archaeology major or something, but still want to deal with these kinds of things. I mean, there is definitely a major partnership with technological fields who help out with a lot of these things, for sure. I'm not sure what the Moses scroll is.
I also do not know.
Okay, here, I had to say that because just last week, our like what you were talking about like if museums would potentially lose an artifact or something like that, our book club last week was The Lost Book of Moses by
yeah.
So it's kind of like, you know, in theory, this like Bible version, or, you know, Hebrew Bible version of Da Vinci Code and stuff or whatever. So read that book, watch our live event from last week.
It's a very, very popular book.
Yeah,
well-researched, good book. Yeah,
it was very interesting. I mean, honestly, the live event was very interesting. It's and I have a degree in classics, for those who know that. So it's stuff that's kind of outside of my realm of knowing any details about. So it's very interesting. Honestly, the only times I had learned anything else about it was in Tina's Dead Sea Scrolls like reading group over the summer. So yes, very interesting. And oh my gosh, perfect segue to January reading groups. So hi, you guys. I am just going to steal these last 2 minutes, unless of course you guys can still send in any questions you have. But so I just wanted to say, usually we have these live events at least like 3 Saturdays a month, but in January, we're just doing mini reading groups and master classes. So, and then we will resume with another book club that's Egyptologist Notebook by Chris Naughton in February, on February 13th. But in January, which they will be up on our website in the next few days. So I'm so sad that they're not there for you to RSVP now, but I'm still going to send the events link out. But we're going to have some mini reading groups that are focused on things. One of them is focused on Euripides Bacchae. Another one is focused on more gender roles and sexuality in ancient Greece and Rome. Another one, or one of our master classes, is going to be focused on law code. So that's something that we were talking about. Hers is specifically in Athens, but focused on some law codes. And another master class focused on both royal and more domestic women in ancient Egypt. So that's something that's 2 of our reading group leaders from the summer, Louisa and Teresa, are coming together to do that masterclass. So please RSVP to those, and we would love to see you there. Shout out to our old reading group people too. I'm sure you would love to see it. They have been asking for more reading groups and stuff. So those will be on the website soon for you to RSVP to. It's the same thing of having a live syllabus, and we give you links to all an English translation of the things that we'll be reading. And then, they'll have the meeting times and stuff on the website. So yeah, come to our next live events. Will be reading groups and master classes. Other than that, I think that's my little spiel. And if you guys have anything else you want to say, thank you. This was so interesting and great. Again, not something I study. So I was asking some of these questions and learning a lot. So thank you guys so much. It was really interesting.
Thank you all. I'll throw my email address in the bottom if people want to email us about anything.
And I guess I can, well, I'll send along an email address, I guess. But yeah, and it was really great doing this. This was really fun.
It was fun. Thank you. It's nice to interact with people in our and especially now in our holiday isolation is even more so than normal isolation.
As the days get darker and shorter.
Yes.
Oh, honestly. Well, yes, so I guess we are at time. So thank you everyone for coming and asking great questions today. Hopefully you'll come to some reading groups and stuff, and we'll see you in our next live events. So have a great holiday season and Happy New Year, and see you later.